Welcome to yet another edition of Talking with Springfield Township, this being a very special edition. We unfortunately have to say goodbye to one of our fellow friends here in the township. Yes, Administrator Mike Henninkamp has decided to retire. I know, by looking at him, you would not think it was time for him to do so, but he is moving on to bigger and better things in his life. And in this moment in time, we'd like to thank Mike for all of the hard work, time, and dedication that he's given to the township, as well as us here at Waycross Community Media. So rather than dragging him in during his retirement and saying all these wonderful accolades, but I'm sure we will bring him in at some point in time, I think it would be so apropos to bring on the first episode of Talking with Springfield Township in which Mike Henninkamp did appear. Things were going very well for the township, and you can see things have definitely changed on the set of Talking With. Not only has the hosts changed, but so too have the topics, and so too have the guests. So this is our thank you to you, Mike, for the hard work, dedication, and diligence that you've put into the township. So until next time, when we will be bringing new administrator Chris Gilbert onto the program, we will see you in the summer. And so until then, have a great one and enjoy this flashback of our very first and celebrating 20 years of Talking with this Talking with Springfield Township.
Hello, I'm Tom Schneider, Government Access Coordinator for Waycross Community Media, and welcome to our new government series. This program is designed to allow our local government administrators and the viewers at home to communicate with each other. Tonight, we're going to be talking with Springfield Township and Township Administrator Mike Henninkamp. Welcome to the debut of our Talking With series.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Great. And tonight we're going to be talking about some of the issues that residents can expect to see coming up in the new year. And in just a moment, we're going to open those phone lines up. But to start things off, thought we'd talk about one of the things that actually started back last December was a series of focus groups that you conduct in the township. What was going on with those focus groups?
Well, Tom, the focus group process that we utilized this year is actually tied back into the processing and doing 5-year plans for the township and also the annual budget process. The focus groups that we used were really just kind of a critical self-analysis of each of the different departments in the township and also each of the different service delivery functions that the township provides. And it was an opportunity for us to kind of take a look at the things that we're doing and to look at the things that we're doing right and the things that we feel like maybe some improvement could take place and brainstorm for some solutions, all kind of aimed at trying to do things better. And
were these primarily just department heads involved in this?
Well, actually it started out in each of the departments, the department head was involved, but then we allowed the department head to select individuals from within each of their departments so that we got a good cross-section of the different people in the departments. For instance, in the case of the police department, the focus groups that all went for about a 3 or 4 month period included a member of every rank, so that we had a patrolman on that team, we had somebody from our detective unit, we had a sergeant, we had a lieutenant, and a captain as well as the chief. And that allowed us to ensure a perspective from each of the different departments was given. The fire department actually did theirs a little differently. They actually did kind of an in-house focus group, and they generated a whole lot of issues and a whole lot of ideas, and then that was brought up, and then the focus group we used then more of an executive focus group to kind of go over some of the things that came out of their sessions.
And roughly how many departments are there within the township?
Well, there's the police department, fire department, our service department, which includes both road maintenance and also maintenance of our park system. We have a zoning department, also an individual director for senior services, our recreation director. The 3 main departments in terms of employees and predominant number of services that we offer would be in police, fire, and roads.
Okay. And all these issues, we'll go from one extreme to the other. Probably, what was the best thing that you found, maybe of all the services? What seemed to get the highest rank among?
Well, we did, again, it's such an evolutionary process that we've gone through in the last 2.5 years. really it actually stemmed back to the Land Use Division, Land Use and Zoning Committee, which was a 17-member committee made up of township residents. We selected those members to ensure a cross-section from all different parts of the community. And one of the things that they came up with initially was to come up with a survey that was put out to what they considered to be the 50 different types of community leaders. That would be leaders of church organizations, schools, business leaders, just so that we got a cross-section of the community. And what came back in terms of what was important to them as residents of the community, those were the three biggest areas, is that they wanted the township to focus on police, fire, and roads. So there were no surprises from that standpoint. In the focus groups, I don't think there were really so much a surprise or so much the things that we were doing well, because a lot of the stuff was focusing on efficiencies. Townships have only a limited source of revenues, and we rely, about 80% of our revenues come from property tax. And because of that, they are not tied to inflationary increases, and that kind of got through that whole discussion when we went through our levies passage during last year. Much of that, the funds, when you're going out on a property tax, they're going to stay the same. So if you pass a levy for something, you're not going to see inflationary increases as a result of years, but yet your inflation is going to affect your departments. So most of the effort in the focus group was, how can we do things better? How can we do things more efficiently? Because we know our dollars are going to be tied, and we understand completely, as homeowners, we don't want to pay any more taxes. I certainly don't want to pay higher taxes. So we're constantly looking at ways to do things better, more effectively. The other part of that, of course, is that our community is changing. And something that we may have been structured a certain way to deal with a problem that was predominant 10 years ago, and the community is changing, has different needs, so we need to make sure that our departments are structured in a way that we're growing and moving with what the needs of the community are.
Great. And I know in being at the last couple of township meetings, some of these items that have come out of these focus groups have already been tied into the 1998 budget, I believe.
Correct.
What are some of those things that people can expect?
Well, I would say there's probably starting with the fire department, which is the newest of all of the township services. In the case of the fire department, probably the biggest change has to do with staffing. In 1997, we were able to lower our ISO rating from a 5 to a 4.
Real quick, ISO rating
rating is a rating that's it's actually an insurance services office rating that is done by a national organization, and that rating is used by insurance companies to determine the insurance that you will pay on your home, and also is something that obviously affects business owners very much. The lower the rating, the better supposedly the service. We were able to lower that rating from a 5 to a 4, mostly because of the on-station personnel that we put on during 1997. So the biggest thing in our focus group that came out was ways, again, to increase our staffing in the fire department, and by doing that, we feel like we can increase or improve on our response time. When you're dealing with any kind of emergency service, obviously you need to get on the scene as quickly as possible, and you can only do that if you have people on station. And so, with our increase in staffing of going from 8 people on station, which was current, we're going to be going to 11 that are on station. That'll enable us to get people out quicker, and also make sure that the people that are going to those runs, they're adequately staffed. The second thing that does, of course, is that if we have a run, say for a squad run, and then we have a simultaneous squad run, this allows us to get a second crew out without having to utilize mutual aid. In the fire service, almost every department's going to have a number of incidences where they're going to have to go to mutual aid. It's just impossible to be staffed to handle everything that might occur. But we feel like with this staffing level, roughly 96% of the runs are going to be handled by the township. So that's probably the biggest thing that we saw in the fire. The other involves capital improvements, and we're going to be making some improvements to both Station 79, which is located, that's the headquarters station located on Winton Road, and also Station 75, which is on Burlington Road. we're going to be making some renovations to those facilities so that we can accommodate the on-station, having people on station 24 hours with locker room facilities and sleeping quarters. Now that we are a full-time 24-hour, 365-day operation. So, in the police department, I think the thing there again is some restructuring. We took a look real hard at our ranks and whether we were staffed to do all of the things that we wanted to do. A lot of the change there is in something that's pretty popular nationally, and that is something called community-oriented policing. And that's kind of going back into kind of the old style of getting police officers out into the community, where neighborhoods can be kind of familiar with a particular officer or a group of officers. Something, I guess, back in the 40s, 50s, more commonly a beat cop, somebody who's out walking, not just in the cruiser. And we really are trying to orient our structure so that we can do those types of things. A couple different programs have been started there. Our Citizens Police Academy is something that directly ties back into that community-oriented policing. We have a school resource officer. All things that we can do to try to get police officers and residents interacting with one another. And you know, normally when you have a police officer involved in a situation, that situation has some negative aspect to it. You know, if they're writing a ticket, obviously that has the negative aspect to the person who's receiving the ticket. Even in a situation where the police officer might be assisting one person, the other person might be getting arrested. So there's always a negative. We're looking at ways to do things where you know, we can fight crime through preventative measures by being involved in the community, and where there's not necessarily an adversarial relationship, but one that's positive. A real big area would be in our road department, or in the roads, in the area of roads. We have invested heavily in something called a computer, we're using a program basically that will go out. We hired a contractor last year, an engineering firm, to go out and do a review of all of the township streets. And then that information, given the condition of those streets, is fed into a computer. So we are now able to rate the streets in the township based on when we think that road will deteriorate to a certain level. And based on that, we are able to project long-term where our financial needs were. Well, after we did some analysis of that data, we had some very discouraging information that coming back to us that basically we had a series of roads, or a large lump of roads, that were going to need repair at the same time. And this wasn't any great surprise because most of our roads were built about the same time. And you know, from that aspect, we were able to go out on a tax anticipatory note in the amount of $2.3 million, and hopefully this will allow us to catch up. So this year, residents are going to see more construction on township roads in terms of repaving, you know, the repair of sidewalks, repair of curbs than ever before. We're going to spend close to $1 million, which will be the greatest amount ever spent in 1 year for the township. You know, the other big area would have been in the area of parks. Parks? Yep, okay, where we're really taking a look at some capital improvements there, and how can we better utilize and maintain the park system.
That's great. Before we go any farther, I'd like to give everybody at home the opportunity to call in with your questions. That number is 825-3971. Township Administrator Mike Henninkamp is with us, here to answer your questions about the township. And you were talking some about the road improvements, the $1 million that's going to be spent. Are there any things already laid out, major projects that are on the books coming up here?
Yeah, we have a pretty good idea for at least the next 5 years of what the road repairs are going to be. And as I said, the pavement management system gives us a ranking of, you know, what road is in the worst condition. You can't use that ranking, only that ranking. You have to use some common sense in the way we bid projects. You know, you need to get projects that are close in terms of their proximity to one another. So it's also, if you've got a major street and 3 side streets coming off of that, you're most likely to do those 3 side streets at the same time you're doing that major street. So situation like that. But we're pretty well set for the next 5 years, given the fact that we've gone out on this note. We really have a pretty firm idea of what we're going to be able to do. The thing that may vary slightly from that is that each year we go out for what's called most commonly referred to as state issue 2 money. And these are funds that are available from the state that come down to the county, and then all of the jurisdictions within Hamilton County apply for state issue 2 money, and the county then uses a criteria to rate, and it's competitive. We've been real successful with that over the last 5 years. Unfortunately, there's been a couple projects that we felt like we would have gotten funded through that method and didn't. So, you know, each year we have to review where we stand with that.
And I believe we have our first caller of the evening. We have Dave from Finneytown on the phone. Dave, what's your question?
Hi, this is a question for Mike Town. First of all, Mike, I want you to know that I think the township has done a fabulous job for a number of years in terms of efficiency and effectiveness.
Thank you, Dave.
But I've got a couple of questions, and I think they may be related. I know a number of years ago the township was looking at some possible way of becoming incorporated as a township, if that sounds familiar to you. There was some talk, I think, in the state legislature about permitting that. And of course, the two things that would have done were first give the township more leeway on the different ways it could raise funds for the things that were needed. But in addition to that, I think more control over zoning, because as I understand it right now, zoning is pretty complicated, isn't it? It doesn't go to the county and other non-township people, so you can have an advisory board that really don't have a lot of control.
Well, you're right. It is very complicated. I'll deal with your zoning question first. In Springfield Township, zoning jurisdiction actually is handled both by Hamilton County and by Springfield Township. There's about 5 precincts in the northwestern portion of Springfield Township that actually are under the jurisdiction of the township trustees. So those areas are totally controlled by Springfield Township. Now, in the case of a subdivision planning, that type of, which is traditionally called planning, is still done by the county, and that's because of the way state law is set up. About 75% of the township is under the jurisdiction of Hamilton County. So as a township, the township could elect to adopt local zoning. And in fact, that is one of the issues that is going to be looked at this year through a study of what the pros and cons of that are. Many townships have gone to local zoning. So as far as the laws, Springfield Township could do its own zoning and pretty much doesn't have any limits on zoning. Whether it was a city or a township, we pretty much share the same level of authority. Regarding Dave's question with incorporation, that issue has not come up. I've heard that sometime down in the Finneytown area there have been some folks that have brought it up, but there hasn't really been a whole lot, at least in my 2.5 years in the township, where I've heard that. I have been involved in incorporations in a different township, in Union Township in Butler County, which has tried it 3 times. And there's no question incorporation would certainly give the township, or would give the new entity, which would be a municipality, greater authority. Whether that would be beneficial or not is really would require a lot of very in-depth study. The problem with incorporation, I think, for Springfield Township is we are predominantly a bedroom community. You know, we have some business activities in the Brentwood area. We have some commercial activities along Hamilton corridor, and a couple of very small industrial areas. But predominantly, it's a bedroom community. And the downside of incorporation is that as a township, you're multi-jurisdictional. In other words, there are certain responsibilities that are taken on by the county and the state when you have a township form of government. Winton Road, for example, is not under the township's jurisdiction. It's under the county's, and there's a variety of different county roads. So we benefit from that. As a city, you assume all of those responsibilities. And where those responsibilities can be very positive, you have to look at, do you generate enough revenue to offset that? The biggest thing that you gain and the biggest difference between the taxing structure of a city and a township is that a city has the ability to levy an earnings tax, whereas a township through state law does not. So certainly that would be the biggest opportunity to gain additional revenues, but at what expense? And mostly that is what is favored about the township form of government, is that residents, you know, they want to live in a township because they don't have to pay that earnings tax, and yet they receive the same, what they feel are the same types of revenue, or same types of benefits, you know, and services. So I think it's something that always ought to be looked at, and there's pros to that side and there's cons, and probably the biggest con to remaining a township is annexation, and the threat of annexation, which could certainly you know, leave the township crippled in that case. And if that's the case and we don't have annexation reform, then I think that's something that has to be looked at. But just from what little I've looked at it, it's going to be tough for the township, because I think their ability to generate new revenue would be very limited given the small percentage of business property that we have. But certainly good question, and certainly something that ought to be looked at.
We thank Dave for his question. Just remind everybody, the lines are open, 825-3971. Mike Henninkamp here to answer your question. Piggyback off something we talked about, you brought up annexation and annexation reform. I know it's been kicked around at the State House for a number of years. What is the latest on that issue?
There are two bills. One is House Bill 115, and the other is Senate Bill 162. And both of those two bills, of course, one introduced in the Senate, one in the House, to the best of my knowledge right now, are kind of laying dormant in committee. And I really don't know the specific differences between both of those, but annexation reform is, and what you're referring to over the last 2 or 3 years, has been a very hot topic, very hotly debated topic in the state legislature over the last few years. Has been to try to level the playing field, I guess is probably the easiest way to describe that, to give townships the same ability to defend against annexations as cities could from coming in and trying to annex areas.
Why are townships so vulnerable when it comes to annexation? I mean, it always seems like, you know, townships get nipped all around the edges from different communities. Why are they so vulnerable?
It's the current law. The way they, and I think you need to understand the history. Townships were formed to be caretaker forms of government. They were never intended to become large urban, an urban form of government. You know, most of the laws that are on the books even today for township government go back as far as 1850. And, you know, when the state constitution was amended back in, I think, in 1852. So a lot of the things that we deal with is because of the antiquated nature of the law. You know, since that time, there's obviously been a lot of different changes, you know, in what's on the books. But if you really look at what the purpose of townships were, they weren't ever designed to become urban areas. And as they've increasingly so become popular among residents because there's no income tax. I think, you know, just a general notion across the country is people want less government in their lives. The township form of government gives them that. It's a very streamlined, very effective form of government. We don't have a lot of bureaucracy. We are not allowed to deficit spend, and we provide the meat and potatoes form of government, you know, with police, fire, roads, parks, and some other basic services. So the biggest problem that we have is that the laws favor incorporation, because the way the Constitution was set up is, as an area populated, they were intended to become part of cities. And what the legislature, of course, couldn't have anticipated at that time is that townships are now a very popular form as even as urban areas. And in the Cincinnati area, we have some, you know, we have a high number of some of the largest townships in the state are located in this area. And the sophistication level is every bit as equal as that of the municipal areas within Hamilton County. And but the laws haven't changed, and I think mainly it's it's been a political battle. The cities don't want to give up that right. The other thing is, Tom, is there's close to some 1,400 townships in the state of Ohio. Probably 90% of them have populations of under 10,000. And so I think the other thing that's the large urban township, when compared to all townships in the state of Ohio, is still something that's fairly rare. And so they haven't been willing to change the law for all townships, And I think what may happen is you may see some of a different designation for urban townships or something called a home rule township, which might differentiate between large and small ones.
Now, if, let's say, residents are approached about having their community, their road or whatever, annexed into a neighboring community, what should they do?
Well, I think the first thing they should do is, contact the township and check facts and make sure that what this neighboring community is promising you is actually factual. Can they deliver better services to you? Can they, are your property taxes going to be relatively the same compared to the services that you're going to receive? A lot of reasoning behind annexations is tied to school district. Somebody wants to be in a different school district, and that is the biggest thing to watch out for, because an annexation does not change the boundaries of the school district. That is an entirely separate process. Right. So, just to make sure that you get the facts before you sign. Once that petition's there, people have 30 days to take their name off, but before you even sign, check the facts, because a city can come in and make all sorts of promises, annex, and there is nothing in the law that requires them to hold to those types of promises. I don't know that it's so much in this part of the state of Ohio, but a lot of reasons for annexation have to do with water. That's something that's been really dominant in the area around Columbus, Ohio, is that Columbus controls the water and sewer. And so that if you have vacant property and you want to develop it, Columbus makes you come in before they'll let you tap into their water and sewer system. Excuse me. We don't have that problem because we have Metropolitan Sewer and Cincinnati Water Works, which is, for the most part, a regional type of agency. So again, I would make sure that somebody checks the facts before they sign, so they know what they're getting into.
Sounds good. We have another call on the phone. Oh, hello. We have Patty, who is from Springfield Township. She's on the phone. Patty, what is your question?
Yes, I've been feeling like I'm being taxed to death. Can you at least tell me where my tax dollars are going?
Yes, Patty, I sure can. In fact, I think we've even got you're going to be getting something within the next week or two, which is the Township newsletter, which the winter edition will be coming out within the next week or so. And on the front page of that, we've talked about some of the items that we're budgeting for, and then also broke down to give residents an idea of where their taxes go. As I said, about 78% of our revenues come from property tax. So that's the only thing we really can talk about. Of the property tax that a resident of Springfield Township pays, roughly 60 cents on every dollar that you pay is going to the schools. Now, Springfield Township has 7 different school districts, all with different millages, so that 60 cents is a rounded number. If you're in the Finneytown, it may be a little higher. If you're in Mount Healthy, it may be just slightly lower, and Winton Woods would be a different rate, as well as Cincinnati, Princeton, Northwest. So you have to check your specific, but roughly 55 to 62% of all the property tax you pay is going to school district in which you live. About 21% of the property tax that you pay is going to the county. And that includes all of the different, that's a wide variety. That'd be the county park district, the Board of Mental Retardation, the senior services, the zoo, as well as the county general fund. There's just about 8 or 9 different items that we've kind of lumped into that 21%. And then roughly 19% of what you're paying in terms of your property tax, or 19 cents on every dollar, goes to the township. And the lion's share of that is for police service. Police and fire are the lion's share of that. We also have roughly probably 3 or 4 cents of everything you're paying for roads and for general administration. So if you add those numbers, remembering that almost all of the township's money is coming from property tax, yet 82% of the property tax that a resident of Springfield Township is paying is going to either Hamilton County or going to that particular school district. And that's frustrating for us because we get that call a lot, and especially recently with tax bills having just gone out within the last month or so, it's very frustrating for us because there is no other revenue source for the township other than the property tax. And unfortunately, residents have just really been hit hard. But again, that stems back from being a bedroom community.
Right. And where your taxes, maybe for property taxes, seem like you're paying a lot, when you balance in the fact you don't have to pay earnings and income tax,
Absolutely.
It really knocks it down then.
You know, if you look at the taxation rate, you're exactly right, Tom. If you look at the taxation rate between jurisdictions, there are parts of Springfield Township that have a high property tax. And again, I'm not looking to lay blame on the school districts, but the lion's share of that really falls upon the school districts. But you're right, if you compare against other communities and where one community may have a lower, you know, for Cincinnati, for example, may have a lower property tax, but you're paying 2.1% of your earnings to the city if you work or live there.
Right.
So it really, you know, if you check across, you could see some variances, but for the most part, I think it does kind of balance out between jurisdictions.
So, great. I know another thing that's coming up, and this was mentioned at the last Township Trustees meeting, is that you're looking to form like a Chamber of Commerce type organization for Springfield Township.
That's correct.
What's going on with that group?
Well, this is an idea, again, that came out of the vision, land use, and zoning, the visioning plan that we did for the township about a year ago. And I guess in the last 2.5 years, I've had a variety of people come up to me and say that this was something that they felt needed to be done for Springfield Township. As I said, we're predominantly a bedroom community, but we do have two major corridors with about 400 to 500 businesses located in the township. The problem is nobody has really kind of grabbed the ball and run with it. And in the last month or so, I've had a couple of business leaders approach me about getting a steering committee together and see if such an organization could be formed. So we've taken the initial steps. The steering committee has gotten together, and we've actually sent out a letter to all of the businesses in Springfield Township, including home-based businesses, home occupation type businesses, which numbered somewhere in the neighborhood, I think, of about 750 businesses. Excuse me. And we sent out the letter and also asked them to fill in a survey to get, you know, an idea of the interest level. And we're getting a good response back at this point. We've got about another week to go before, you know, for the deadline of that. And then we're going to have an inaugural meeting, an initial meeting on March the 11th at 5:30 p.m. and that's going to be held back at the Grove, our banquet hall back at the Grove. And hopefully at that meeting we'll ascertain, you know, what level of interest is there, and kind of go from there.
And what are your goals for if and when this thing comes together? What are your goals for this group?
Well, you know, first off, the primary goal is that it's not a township or it's not a governmental endeavor. The township's playing the role of facilitator or coordinator just to try to get the ball rolling. We want to be an active member in the organization, but we want it to be owned by the businesses of Springfield Township. I think, you know, in a nutshell, we want the overall goal would be to improve business. To improve the number of businesses, the quality of those businesses, and then for those businesses, we want business to be better for them to do in Springfield Township. You know, if those things happen, we're all going to benefit. Our residents are going to benefit in terms of the fact that we'll have a strong tax base and a strong business base. Their quality of life will be improved because they'll have convenience of having, you know, the types of businesses that they need in their daily lives, good grocery stores, you know, hardware stores, restaurants, those types of things. And of course, businesses will benefit because in terms of profits. And, you know, if those things can happen, that's what we win. It's going to be a win-win situation. But, you know, there's networking opportunities, and it also gives a forum for the business community to speak with one voice if they have an issue, whether that may be a zoning issue, that they feel like a certain zoning action by Springfield Township would be detrimental to business. So it's an opportunity to bring some balance between property owners, residential property owners and commercial property owners, to doing something that overall benefits the township. So I think it's going to take some time.
Great.
Because again, you know, we suffer from an identity, but we're getting a pretty good response back, and it'll be interesting to see how many we see turn out for the first meeting. And you know, once we can build some momentum, then hopefully it'll be a positive thing, and we'll be able to, you know, have some beneficial effect to the township.
Great. Well, we are live here on February 26th. The number is 825-3971. Mike Henninkamp is here to take any questions you have concerning the township. And keeping on the business front, I know driving down Winton Road, just south there of the Township building, I've been noticing some, looks like construction barricades going up along there. What's going to be going in, I guess, just south of the Skyline Chili area?
We've had a lot of activity in that area. That is going to be a Carrington home development, which is I guess the best way to describe that is an assisted living type of facility. It's not quite a nursing home. I think there's a little more independence from the residents that will be living in that facility. That's something that was approved last fall through the zoning process. Some of the property was already zoned appropriately for it, but a couple of those parcels were not. I think it's going to be a very attractive development. There's a number of them in the Cincinnati area. They're fairly recent in development. They're beautiful buildings, and I really think it's going to be an asset to the community because we have a population segment that is clearly aging in Springfield Township. And one of the things that I hear from those people is that they may not, desire to have the single-family home and the yard and all of that sort of thing to take care of. So they want to remain in the township, and they're looking for, a high amenity type of living facility. And also this gives them the opportunity that as they even get older, that they have, some medical staff on hand and to help them with, some other things. So I think it's going to be a great project for the township.
Sounds great. Another thing we touched on, earlier on, and it probably links up with this Chamber of Commerce maybe in some ways, is we're talking about the land use and the vision plan, the land use plan. What's the status of that?
We started that process longer enough ago that I'd like to admit. It's actually, we did, the vision process was kind of the first step, and visioning has kind of gotten really in vogue for communities recently, and that basically just says, what do we want to be, where do we want to go for the community, what are the things we see ourselves being in the next 5, 10, 15 years. Those things have been completed about a year ago. The land use plan is something that ties, as you said, right back to zoning. The plan is basically complete, at least in terms of the committee's work. It simply needs to be formatted, and it's something that I'm hoping to get to and looking at different ways to try to complete what is just a lot of busy work. We've had so many other projects going on that I haven't had the opportunity to jump back in that. And then we're going to take a look at our zoning. And when I say take a look at the zoning, it's mainly a jurisdictional issue. Should we stay the way we are? Should we go all county? Should we go all township? What are the pros? What are the cons? What are the costs? And have some public hearings. So by the end of this year, we will have all three of those components complete. And as I said, really the lion's share of the land use plan is done. It just needs to be put into its report form and presented to the board.
Great. The other thing that was brought up and it was brought up earlier last year, or late last year, was the Warder Nursery property. Is there anything new going on with that?
We're busy. Okay. We were busy. We, Warder is a property about a 55-acre or 50 plus, slightly over 50-acre parcel that is owned by the Cincinnati Park Board, and it sits just on the east side of Winton Road, kind of directly east of Whitaker Elementary School, and has been was a former nursery used by Cincinnati to grow trees and various horticulture projects for their park system. And I think really what the Cincinnati is in the process of determining whether they have a use for it, and we don't think that they will, at least from what we're hearing from them. They feel like at some point that will become excess property for them. The township is very interested in that property, and we're interested in it for some type of park use, but we have to look at what the costs are, and we are in negotiations and discussions with Cincinnati to try to look at that. So can't give you any more details really than that part of it, but we've really tried to get some input from the overall community, and certainly the Finneytown part of the township would benefit most greatly if the township acquired that for some type of parkland, but we need to make decisions that benefit all of our residents, and so that's been our focus is, can there be a regional type park need there, which makes it appropriate to expend those kind of dollars for it. But we're looking at some creative things and creative ways of trying to acquire that. So, hopefully have good news within the next by the end of the year again on that situation.
It's a nice piece of property up there.
I think it could really be, there's some great opportunities for what that could be, and one of the things that I think the Board of Trustees has really done a great job is we've taken some very careful steps. We're not overreacting to that. We're not jumping in. And if we were able to acquire that or gain some kind of control for township use, we're going to take our time and make sure that that facility is done, you know, first class, is done right, because it really offers the opportunity to be kind of the crown jewel of the park system.
Yeah, great. And we're looking for your input here tonight as well. The number is 825-3971. Getting down to probably some of the last of the questions that I've brought together here. But one of the things, and we've talked about this several times, you know, preparing for the show, and we were talking about it yesterday, about looking at the township itself. And in a lot of ways, it is kind of spread out. I mean, when you think about the township goes from basically Edgemont to the south all the way to Pleasant Run Farms all the way to the north here on the other side of 275.
Right.
Sometimes that creates what some people I guess can call an identity crisis for the township.
Yep.
What are some of the things that the township has been doing to kind of try to address that problem?
Well, probably the first thing we've done, I guess, that had the biggest impact was fire department. The creation of a township fire department gave us some identity where for probably 85% of our community is now served by Springfield Township Fire Department, as opposed to a private fire company or some neighboring jurisdictions fire company. We do continue to contract for some areas that are difficult for us to serve with ours to make sure that people are getting first-class service. Secondly, we have a township newsletter. This is something that we started, I guess it was early fall last year. And this is just a way to get information out. The community press does a super job getting information to our residents. They cover us very well. And that reaches the majority of our residents, but not all. Right. And so the newsletter is things where we can try to keep our residents informed and make sure that they're aware of it. We've, as I mentioned, the community press, they've done a guide to Springfield Township. And then within the next probably month or so, we should be doing a mailing out to all of the residents, which is a community profile, listing of all phone numbers, things like that. Again, I think it's something you can't do any one thing. Right. Those have been probably the two biggest things. We're trying to get out into, make sure we get out into our civic associations so that we continue to have a good rapport with them. Right. You know, attend their meetings, find out what their issues and needs are, and just take every opportunity that no matter what issue we have to educate residents. Probably the biggest thing I find is that, you know, I'll receive all types of calls from residents that are upset about one thing or another. And I would say in 95% of the cases, when you lay the facts out and they understand really whose jurisdiction it is, why it's an issue, you can almost diffuse every one of them. And, you know, there are certain issues where people are going to disagree with your decision. Right. And, you know, we can appreciate that. But most of it's just people don't understand. It's a very difficult community to live in because, you know, you have, as we said, 7 different school districts. So if you belong to Mount Healthy Schools, you assume that you live in Mount Healthy, or you assume that you live in North College Hill, or you assume that you must be part of Pleasant Run. What is that? Is that a political jurisdiction? So, and I don't think we're totally unique. That's just inherent in the Cincinnati metropolitan area. I mean, in Hamilton County alone, there's 37 different jurisdictions, and we are a very parochial people. Everybody likes their own little burg and their little subdivision to identify with. And it's not all bad. It just creates some problems for us so people can interact with their government. But those are some of the things we're doing. Probably the biggest thing we're looking to do is celebrate that diversity. I mean, we're not going to change that, so let's play that up as a positive. And I think it is a positive because we have a wide variety of different housing styles and different areas of the community people can live in. So that's, you know, that's some of the things that we're doing, and we're looking at possibly having an event, a community-wide event to do that.
Great. Probably send out the last. We're going to start to wind things down around here, so if you do have any last-minute questions, this would be the time to call. That's 825-3971. You know, is there anything else going on that, you know, maybe that hasn't been touched upon, you know, in what we've been talking about tonight that people should know about?
You know, I think we've we've covered a lot of area.
Oh, yeah.
I'm trying to think where maybe we didn't.
Well, maybe the other part is, and that's one thing when you're talking about people calling in and they're not sure when they call in with problems, whatever, they're not sure about what to ask, whatever. What is probably the biggest misconception about a township that people just sometimes don't understand? Usually,
with a tax question, we get hit on pretty good, and usually jurisdiction, where they'll see something, you know, gee, Winton Road wasn't plowed, or we thought you did a terrible job of removing the snow on Winton Road, and that's not in our jurisdiction. And so it's kind of bringing them. Water and sewer issues are, you know, especially drainage. You know, as we get into the spring season, and with all the crazy weather patterns that are going on out there, you know, I'm kind of holding my breath that we're going to have a wet spring, and you know, we're going to have people besieged with water problems. The biggest frustration that we have, if you've got a creek in your backyard, I think there's a normal assumption to say, well, that must belong to somebody. That's some governmental jurisdiction owns that and is responsible for that. And unfortunately, in probably 95% of the cases, no governmental entity does. And that just, people are just, they can't believe that somebody isn't responsible for the fact that their backyard is being eroded away. And you go out and you see those situations, they're just horrible. And there's nothing that we can do. I mean, I think you've been to some of the meetings where we dealt with the Silly Creek issue. And, you know, we try to point them to the right people, but it's very frustrating because we have limited authority in that area. So I would say probably drainage and jurisdictional issues are the biggest things that we hear, or that we have some control over the school district. If the school board's made a decision, they think we can override it, something along that lines. Great.
So, well, I think this is the point where we're going to wrap things up tonight. I want to thank you, Mike, for being our guinea pig for our first show here. For the residents of Springfield Township, this is going to be a live quarterly program, so we'll have Mike back in here, I guess, the last week of May. Would like to thank all of you. Thank Dave and Patty for calling in with your questions. Thank to our volunteer crew here, as well as to the Hilltop Press for promoting the show for us. And at this point, we'll thank you for tuning into Waycross Community Media. And tune in next month when we'll be talking to another one of our community governments. So.